You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum.
Hello, and welcome to the next in our series of quarterly webinars that we produce to bring information to you about things related to officer traffic safety, what's happening with regard to law enforcement fatalities, injuries, and things in the world of, as I said, law enforcement traffic safety. My name is Nick Breul. I'm the Senior Project Manager here at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. I want to thank NHTSA, who's here with us. They, through a cooperative agreement, sponsor this and the research that we do. And they have been partners with us for, I've been here over 10 years. And so I think it's at least 14, if not 15 years that we've had this tremendous relationship with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. So I want to, as always, thank them for their support. Before I forget, there is a Q&A function. Please feel free to put, as we're going through the webinar, put a comment or ask a question. We'll get to the questions at the end. We have a guest presenter with us today, a gentleman by the name of Kelly Couch, who's going to talk to us a little bit about intersections and sirens and maybe touch on a couple of other things. So I'm going to do my piece first, and then we'll turn it over to Kelly. As always, I generally do about 3 things on my portion of these webinars, and that is, 1, just to update you on the Memorial Fund, what's happening here. We're getting ready to come into National Police Week. So those of you who are LELs or who are in law enforcement, or are retired from law enforcement, may be interested in the events going on surrounding National Police Week. If you notice, behind me is the Wall of Remembrance. We've done several of our quarterly webinars from here. This wall changes. These are the images of the line of duty deaths that were engraved on the wall last May in 2025, and a new group of names as well as their images and or patches, if you don't have a photograph, will be added to this Wall of Remembrance in the next few weeks. And they're already, I think, getting ready to start engraving names this month. So this year, there'll be a total of 363 names added to the National Law Enforcement Memorial. I chose this picture. It's a spring picture of the memorial. There's actually, which I've pointed out in the past, there's actually been a capstone added to the top of the long wall running along each one of the wings because we're running out of names. 111 of the names being added this year are line of duty deaths directly from the year 2025. As I mentioned, I think it's April 21st. Thank you. Ann is with me as always. April 21st, they will begin engraving the names. This is just a quick look at what it looks like as they etch those names into the wall. They've already laid out all of the templates for the names, so they know how those names are going to run along the wall. Police Week this year is going to be from May 11th through May 16th. And here's a look at a few of the events that'll be occurring. I think key in those are, it's always, if you're here in DC and attending Police Week, and maybe not a lot of you are, but I know a lot of you are retired law enforcement, some of you current law enforcement, and some of you may be law enforcement liaisons. So you may be coming and you may have an interest in some of these events. There'll be the Police Unity Tour ride-in. There's a ceremony, and that's a pretty big event when all of those bicyclists from around the spokes ride into the museum as a core group. And it's often a very emotional moment and an impactful moment for those who participate in those rides. You'll see there's some other things going on. There's the Shomrim ceremony. The candlelight vigil is on the 13th. That's really the big event where most of the representatives in law enforcement, senior leaders in law enforcement come and offer remarks as well as read names. And so they'll be reading all 363 names that will be added to the memorial will get read at the candlelight vigil. And it's live streamed, so you can watch it remotely. And it's on the National Mall with the Washington Capitol in the background and the National Monument, the Washington Monument, on the opposite side. So it's a nice evening event. There's the pipe band, excuse me, and then if you're here during the 15th, that's also during the 15th is the FOP event where the names of the fallen are also read on the west lawn of the Capitol. This has been an event that traditionally the president and/or the vice president will attend to honor those officers and their service. And there's also a couple of baseball games being played in DC. If you're here and get tickets, a portion of those tickets, I think they're playing the Orioles, go back to the Memorial Fund. And as always, we need revenue to help support our operations here. I put this up quickly just so everyone can see our landing page. There's lots of material on our landing page. I'm interested, if you can see my mouse, in this, Officer Safety and Wellness. If you click on that, the drop-down will take you to our NHTSA page as well as our Destination Zero page. And there's a whole host of information on different programs. There's videos, there's reports, there's reports we've done on on tire deflation devices. There's reports that we've done analyzing crashes and other presentations that you can watch. Plus, there's short videos on there that are good for roll call to get people's mind right about what's happened or what other officers have experienced and how they can avoid that same scenario. That's what those, what we call them, police safety videos are all about. Hearing from another officer and their experience and hearing from them what they would have done differently. And I think that's very impactful. So I'm part of the Officer Safety and Wellness group here at the Memorial Fund, and our core programs, we're still working with Safe Leo, with suicide awareness for law enforcement. Our Destination Zero program, which has been going since 2014, is still going. That's the National Officer Safety and Wellness Awards. You can submit your agency's program to receive an award after, if it's been evaluated and selected by the committee. You get pulled here to Washington, D.C. in September for a ceremony where you're presented with your award for whichever category you may have won. And then, of course, NHTSA. And then recently, but not that recently, because it started back in May of 2025, we started partnering with Below 100. And Below 100, hopefully all of you know about their training program, which is really a very strong safety training that is not just tactical, but a lot of it ties into vehicle safety. And there are 5 core tenets of Below 100 that almost all of them can be applied to vehicle traffic safety and law enforcement. Lifesavers is coming up. And this is, I was just speaking with Rio about this. It's going to be in Baltimore this year, so that's just up the road from us. If any of you are going to be at Lifesavers, myself, Dale Stockton from Below 100 and John Marshall will be putting a presentation together, largely around roadside safety. So we will have a panel discussion and a presentation, each of us talking about different facets of some of the more dangerous aspects of safety in not only vehicle safety, but roadside safety, and how we can improve on our safety practices in that area. And you should remember John Marshall. He was our honoree last July, I believe, when we had our Traffic Safety Summit. And he is now the recipient of an eponymous award where we're going to give out an award in his name. So if anyone out there knows of someone who's done tremendous work in officer traffic safety, not just traffic safety, but geared towards saving law enforcement and reducing crashes and injuries, we'd like to hear from you and would invite you to submit your name. And my email will be at the end of this presentation. Okay, so just to remind everybody where we were at the end of the year, our numbers were down between 2024 and 2025. So we're overall, the totals were down 25%. Our crashes were down by 26%. And the other categories were all down compared to 2024. So that was pretty good news. And I would say 26% is a pretty significant reduction. And if you probably hear me say this several times, if you've heard my previous presentations, as we're looking at these, we're always looking to see, yeah, there'll be ups and downs, but is the overall trend going downwards? And I believe it is, despite some of the information I'm going to give you now. So here are our numbers year to date through the 30th. So this is the first quarter comparing 2025 to 2026. We are significantly higher in traffic related crashes. We're up by 4, which translates to 71%. And in fact, the numbers are even higher now, as we just had a recent death that I've added, but since the beginning of this month and through the beginning of April, we've added a few more traffic related fatalities on there. Again, one that I just added today, so that changes our numbers a little bit. So the breakout of our 2026 fatal cases thus far, and I'll remind everybody that this is preliminary. And what I do as we get towards the end of the year is I have the opportunity to go through all of the presented cases, which includes crash reports, investigative reports, CAD reports, autopsies, toxicology screens, etc. Those are all really important. But that means when I do my end of year report, I've got really solid data on how the crashes occurred, whether or not they had their seatbelts on, was the person who struck them impaired, were they distracted? I can give details as to what type of roadway they were on, was it darker light, was weather a factor, all that kind of stuff. So now preliminarily you get sort of the basics that I can glean from news reports, talking to contacts, and getting information from the field. So there have been 8 fatal automobile crashes. There have been 5 struck by crashes and 2 motorcycle crashes so far this year, for a total of 15, not 12. So the numbers are up at 15 right now. One of those cases that I'm following, and maybe some folks have heard about it, it has not appeared on ODMP, the Officer Down Memorial page, but I began to track it, and it was a crash involving a corrections officer down in Angola State Prison in Louisiana. So let's get in a little bit into the vehicle crashes. As I mentioned, so we've now had 8 vehicle crashes that were fatal, 2 of which were single vehicle crashes. 3 were head-on crashes, including the one that I had to add today. An Oklahoma State Trooper was involved in a crash when I believe it was a southbound vehicle crossed into the northbound lanes and struck him head-on. And also the vehicle that lost control and I think struck him, the 2 occupants of that vehicle, one of which was a child, also perished in that crash. One of the more unusual cases, and I've gotten some information from folks down, I believe this was a Louisiana crash as well. An officer was struck in his vehicle by a train, and he was apparently on a traffic stop and was not aware, or for whatever reason maybe didn't think that a train would be coming through at that time. Apparently the tracks weren't used that often, but needless to say, he was in his car and struck by a train, which ultimately killed him. And that's one of the more unusual situations. One officer was killed when he was rear-ended, and another was involved in a crash at an intersection. And we're going to talk about intersections, and I think that's what we're going to hear a little bit about from Kelly Couch. And then, as always, I try and give you the information. What were they doing? Well, 2 were on traffic stops. 4 were just on patrol. 1 was struck while pulled over to assist a motorist. You'll hear me talk a little bit more about that. And the details are simply not known. And this is a crash that I mentioned that involved a master sergeant of the correctional facility down in Angola Penitentiary. And the early information I got was, and again, this is coming from media sources, it was an on-duty crash, and it was on the grounds of the penitentiary where a vehicle rolled over into a ditch. Again, no further details on that incident, but hopefully we'll get some more. And if anybody has any details and can share them, please, I'll give you my email at the end of this presentation. So seatbelts, this is the broken record, and this is something we focus on, and this is something we're not going to let go. We're like a dog with the bone. We're not letting this go. And this slide speaks for itself. 50% of officers involved in crashes in 2025 were not wearing their seatbelt. And there's some other things that we noticed in the final reporting that you may have heard me mention, and we're going to touch a little bit on some of those facts, and I think those will help segue into what Kelly's going to talk about. But this is a startling fact, folks, that has to change. The culture has to change. And, as we do training and I talk to the trainers at below 100, we're hearing more and more stories about folks who aren't wearing their seatbelts. Some are having that moment where they do realize they need to, and it's been life-changing for them. But the commonality of officers, either through their training officers or just hearing through the lore of law enforcement, not wearing their seatbelts have got to stop. All right. People wear their bulletproof, their body armor. They've got to wear their seatbelt. And you don't need to hear me preach on that anymore. To me, the facts speak for themselves. The one thing I would say, and if it upsets some people, I'm sorry, but there's definitely officers who would have survived their crash had they had their seatbelt on. So there have been 5 struck-by crashes this year already, and we'll look at the circumstances of those struck-by crashes. But the problem of officers being struck while out on foot, either on a traffic stop, assisting a motorist, or at a crash scene, are extraordinary. They continue to occur. We have to continue our focus on training, preparation, employing the traffic incident management system, TIMS training, anything we can do to help protect people at these scenes, and do a better job of protecting our first responders, because it's incredibly dangerous out there. And I just think more and more people are distracted, and perhaps more are even impaired. I don't want to speculate too hard, except to say that there's a lot of people where I drive in Maryland. I constantly smell marijuana wafting through the traffic and into my window. And it's almost at every traffic light. That tells me we've got a problem with not only drunk driving, but drugged or driving while impaired or high. And it's very common, and I think it's leading to a lot of problems. Here, this is a slide I just keep up there. So as I mentioned, we are constantly measuring this to see how we're doing over time. And we had a huge anomaly in 2021, continued down through 2023, bumped back up into 2024, and then sort of came down a little bit in 2025. This year, we already have 5, and we're 3.5 months into the year. We'll see how we end up through the year, but this is a trend we have to continue to push downward. So the struck by circumstances, as you see there, and I'll talk about 3 that had stopped to assist disabled vehicles. One was an officer in DC who was struck by an impaired driver. The other one was a Massachusetts officer who I think weather played a large factor in that, whereas he was out with a vehicle that had already crashed in very icy, snowy weather, and then another vehicle came into that scene, lost control, and struck the Uxbridge officer. Weather's okay to say it's a contributing factor, but as we all know, you have to control your speed. You're responsible for driving for the conditions. So if you lose control, that's because you're going too fast in that weather, and you're responsible for that. One was directing traffic in an elementary school. This is an unfortunate incident in that it was the second such crash in I'm not sure how many years that it occurred in front of that elementary school or near it on that same stretch of roadway. This deputy was struck when 2 vehicles collided, and one of the vehicles involved in that collision then spun off and struck him, killing him. And then one was making a traffic stop when his car was rear-ended by another vehicle. So the struck by facts for 2026, and this is something that I told you we look at, is it seems like the majority of some of the struck by crashes are happening in darkness. 3 of them were definite violations of slow down and move over. This is something we're looking at. I mentioned to you that we're working on an interactive map that is going to highlight line of duty deaths that are directly the result of someone failing to follow the law for them to slow down and move over. And these crunched rears of patrol cars from state to sheriffs to municipal agencies showing where people have just simply careened into a patrol car that has its lights on, is stopped on the side of the road, to me continues to be inexplicable when, all the visual warning signs are there. And I think, we're looking at a great amount of distraction, but we're also looking at impairment and perhaps other factors. I know in 2 of the cases that we focused on last year, those officers were actually rear-ended intentionally. And if you remember the case from Ohio, that there was a video on, the young man got out of the car and said, "Yeah, I did it on purpose." He goes, and then he admitted he was high, and he said, "I don't like cops." Well, he must have been really high because he ruined his new Camaro crashing into the back of this officer's Explorer. I always mention responder safety, which is the Emergency Responder Safety Institute. You can go to respondersafety.com and get a TIM certificate for free. You just have to sign up and then take the training. According to their data, as of March 18th, 7 first responders and road bay workers have been struck and killed throughout the United States. 6 LEOs, law enforcement officers, and they will sometimes include things that we at the Memorial Fund don't count for line of duty deaths, which would be a crossing guard, a reserve, or an auxiliary. If you don't have sworn law enforcement powers, you don't go on the wall or get counted as a line of duty death by the Memorial Fund. And then 1 towing and recovery. And that's a bit of a switch because traditionally towing and recovery, their numbers are higher. They're higher than fire and EMS and DOT and law enforcement. Normally towing and recovery folks get hit out there at a rate higher than those other responders and safety workers. So we also track motorcycle fatalities. There have been 2 this year. And one of the officers was conducting an escort. I'll mention this only because this is one of the more common circumstances we see. I believe last year there were 2 officers engaged in escorts who were killed as a result of handling escort duties. It's something that you really have to train for, you have to prepare for, and you have to make sure that you are visible. That means wearing a visibility vest. That means having your headlights and emergency lights on, and it means having some form of side lights. There are all kinds of companies that make sidebar lights and saddlebag lights and front fairing lights that can be seen from the side that will help people pick up on you and see that you're there. So we track all of these cases through our NHTSA regions. You can see what they look like here. NHTSA Region 6, and I had the note this morning as I counted them. I think there have been 6 of the 15 fatalities have been in Region 6 this year, the latest having been in Oklahoma. And that happened just yesterday with the trooper that I talked about. Region 6 is definitely an area where we have partnered with Below 100 to concentrate training efforts to continue to get the message out about steps that can be taken to save lives and reduce crashes in that area. Region 4 is also usually pretty high and is just behind Region 6 this year. And that doesn't mean that other regions don't need it. They all do. But we just kind of, let's follow where the data points us. And that's why we try and help and focus on that area. So that's it for just talking about the data for fatal police crashes. I want to talk a little bit about a trend that we continue to see. And I mention this because this leads to pursuits. And the image I chose for this, I chose on purpose because in looking at a number of these situations where police vehicles are stolen, the suspect either runs right up to the vehicle as the officer is getting out to investigate the initial cause of the call, not knowing what's going on, and or they're chasing the suspect and they run back around and hop in the car that has either been left running or has the key in it. And it's something that we really need to work on. I think we found that there were 55 stolen police cars last year that I could find through news reports and so forth. So it's definitely something we can do better to prevent what ultimately leads to a chase. And, I've talked about the reasons for those chases. We can't let that person go with a police car. And in a couple of instances, they make traffic stops with that car and carjack someone else, not to mention the radios, the guns, the equipment, everything that's in that patrol car. So it always leads to a pursuit. The other thing that I did notice, and I put in the list that I keep for news reports, are 3 ambulances have been stolen so far this year. And those ambulances, 2 of those ambulances had patients in them when they were stolen. Again, and that's a big, heavy vehicle. And if you were or are not aware, another heavy vehicle was stolen. And I think it was, do you remember where that was? The Bud Light truck? It was Indiana. It was in Indiana. A Bud Light truck was stolen. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how that vehicle was ultimately interdicted. I'm not going to talk about it today, but if you're going to come to Lifesavers, guarantee that I'm going to talk about that. And if you've seen the video, you might have some questions, and it's very dangerous when we're trying to interdict and stop these big vehicles. So the 2026 injury report, I go through open sources. I have set search patterns in Google and other things, regularly go on officer.com, Police One, ODMP, all these other sites to try and get reports of crashes, just injury crashes, so we can try and get our arms around what's happening, not just with fatalities, and some of these cases ultimately turn out to be fatalities later. So I track them for that reason, but getting our arms around what's happening with injury crashes. And this is where we continue to get details about use of tire deflation devices, impairment, slow down and move over violations, etc. So far, I found 157 news reports. Not all those news reports are injury reports, but through that set of reports, 103 vehicle crashes, 20 officers were struck by vehicles. And for me, a struck by is meaning a physical person was struck by a motor vehicle. 8 motorcycle crashes so far. 7 single vehicle crashes. Again, this is something we focus on. It's all about the operator behind that wheel. They're preventable. 1 tire deflation device where an officer was injured deploying a tire deflation device. And then I did record 2 instances of damaged police vehicles. I don't know about the rest of the country, but I know here in the East, and I know where I live in Maryland, a situation occurred at a major intersection over a weekend at, I think, 9 o'clock at night, where these folks came and took over the intersection. And they had cars that were doing wheelies and everything. And when the police arrived, and I know you've all probably heard or seen stories about this, they literally got in front of the police car and blocked it, started banging on the hood, threw smoke bombs out there, fire extinguishers to blind. The officers started beating in the car, smashing the windows, and denting and damaging the vehicles. These things are going to continue, and at some point, something bad's going to happen. So somewhere along the line, we need to develop a strategy for how law enforcement can deploy and deal with these street takeovers, as they're called. But they're already leading to a lot of problems. And to be frank, I think it scares the hell out of everybody who's even sitting by. So that's it. We have our key topics in traffic safety. Again, seatbelts, if you know the 5 tenets, complacency kills, fatigue, that's a big problem in law enforcement, even for our guys going home. If you've got an officer who has been in court and then worked a 12-hour shift and then is going to be back in the office in 6 hours or whatever, maybe give them an opportunity to catch up on a little sleep. When I was an official, I used to let my guys, we called it hoodling. If they needed to grab a quick 30-minute nap and go park somewhere, just let me know where you are. There's nothing wrong with that. It's much better to have a rested officer and someone who can sort of recover a little bit than to have somebody out there with their eyelids, falling down like shades. Training, that's really the big thing. We've got to train. We do twice a year with our firearms. Hardly any agencies train once a year in vehicle skills, etc. Right side approaches, I see traffic stops to this day. People are on the motor street side, driver's side, talking to the driver with their back to the traffic. Right side approaches. Body armor, wear it can protect you, and of course, be seen. So we're going to talk a little bit about intersections, and I'm going to turn it over to Kelly in a second. from 2022 through 2026, right? So where we are now, I found there were 26 fatal crashes that occurred at intersections. The injury reports from 2026 thus far, 31 of those crashes that I looked at, I also created a new category to determine if it was a crash that occurred at an intersection. 31 of those crashes occurred at intersections. It's something that I feel bad because we should have been talking about it a lot more. And I'm glad we are talking about it now. Our attention was caught by Kelly Couch. He had written an article for Police One, I think it is. He'll correct me if I'm wrong. And it was just a brief article about a really important skill that officers, particularly in urban areas, municipalities, but it applies to everybody, deputy sheriffs and troopers and so on, clearing intersections. And before I turn it over to him, we have to make sure our officers are in fact using their lights and sirens. There have just been so many cases that we've identified, fatal cases and otherwise, and crash cases where innocent people have been killed by a speeding police car that went into an intersection without slowing and clearing and T-boned a car of innocent people and killed people and did not have its lights and sirens on. I don't know why. That's what it's for. But even with your lights and sirens on, we have a responsibility to do better. So with that, here's my email. And I see we've got a question already. I'll get to that in a minute. I want to introduce Kelly Couch. He's a retired detective from the San Francisco Bay Area. He relocated to Oregon and has worked as a trainer at the Oregon Public Safety Academy. He was a lead instructor for their EVOC, emergency vehicles operations, and he helped develop new training, updating the curriculum, as well as adding more decision-based exercises to sort of improve driving skills. So I want to thank you guys for your time, and I'm going to turn it over to Kelly.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation here. And yeah, Nick, just a quick correction. My article on intersections was actually in the PORAC magazine, which is the Peace Officers Research Association of California. And then they publish a magazine. They have about 80,000 members. And then it was reprinted the next month, which was March of this year in American Police Beat magazine. So I think, I'm not sure where Nick saw it, but it was probably in one of those two locations. So yeah, the intro was pretty spot on. I was a police officer in the Bay Area, and I have been training about 10 years up here for the state of Oregon's Public Safety Academy. We have one central academy here, so we train every peace officer in the state. So intersection clearing, I wrote the article because intersection clearing in the training environment has been a bit of a challenge. I went to the ALERT conference this past fall. It was down in Los Angeles County. They did a great job hosting us, and they have a pretty nice facility down there. But even in their driving course or track, we try to stay away from track because we don't want these recruits thinking we're teaching them to race. But their driving course, I looked at. I've been to a couple in Colorado at another conference. And the way we set up our driving courses just aren't well suited for training in intersection clearing. So that's kind of what prompted me to sit down and write this article. Just a disclaimer, related to some of the data I may mention. I am not a data guy. It's I'm relying on publicly available data related to intersection collisions. But it's clear that they're very common in emergency vehicles. From what I could pull, it's somewhere between 25 and 40% of all crashes. That includes injury crashes and fatal crashes take place at intersections. There was data that if you add in fire vehicles and ambulances, is actually a much higher rate related to collisions and where they occur. So it's certainly a problem. So yeah, I think the challenges we were facing at our training facility when we started realizing how important training intersection clearing was just the logistics of how our driving course was laid out. Sometimes there's staffing constraints and other things, but I think as a law enforcement trainer, training emergency vehicles, we need to be a little bit creative in how we handle that. We have a really nice driving course here in the state of Oregon, but we only had really two areas. We had an area where we could set up a 4-lane intersection, and we had one other intersection that we didn't really utilize when we were lapping. But we kind of did some reconfiguring to create at least one more. So we had our 4-way, and then we created actually a couple of more using some portable stop signs. So I think with some creativity, we could at least broach that subject and provide some sort of exercises as an emergency vehicle operations trainer, where we can train officers to some degree in intersection clearing. It's not always possible to create multi-lane intersections. Intersections, vary greatly from a rural area where it may be, just a side street coming onto a main thoroughfare, or a single lane each direction 4-way intersection. In more urban areas, we could have multiple lanes in each direction with turn pockets. It's often controlled by, a stoplight, obviously, in a situation like that. But the task really is to train these new officers, whether it be in a training environment or as a training officer on the street, in making sure that they are clearing those intersections effectively and doing it consistently every time, lane by lane. Again, in our training environment, that can be difficult because of the limitations of the space we have. But it really falls on the field training officers to instill those good habits and make sure that officers are lane by lane clearing intersections. And when I worked out in the East Bay, San Francisco Bay Area, we had a motor officer responding to an urgent priority call at a multi-lane high-speed intersection, who was unfortunately struck at high speed. He ended up surviving, but it's just a lesson in a couple of things. Number one, he, later essentially kind of figured out through the investigation that his view was blocked by someone in a turn pocket. I think we had 2 turn pockets at that location, and he didn't see the car coming through. And unfortunately, was pretty badly injured in that collision. And he was on a motorcycle, so that, exacerbated the injuries, obviously. And as anyone who rides, I'm not a motor guy, but if you ride or you've been out on the road, you know that the visibility issues with motorcycles is critical as well. People just don't see you as much. The sirens aren't as loud. So I think for people out on the road riding the motors, they have to be especially careful when they're navigating intersections. So I think we just need to be creative as trainers when we can in our training facilities. I heard of a local trainer up here who's working on a device that he could kind of remotely activate. It sounds like it's a light type box controller, where he's able to activate a light in a statically just parked vehicle to indicate if it's stopped at an intersection or if it's clear to go, using some sort of a light system. I'm curious to see that. Hopefully I'll make it up there to that agency soon and be able to see what he's working on. But it just shows the creativity of some folks in a training environment, the things they can do to kind of overcome the challenges in training intersection clearing. And it's a big department here in Oregon. We also in our driver training program, we don't have a lot of classroom time. We really try to give a briefing and exercises and spend a majority of the time out on our driving course, so the recruits get time behind the wheel. But we do spend a little bit of time talking about issues in the classroom at the beginning of most of their training sessions, and we usually do a debrief at the end. And we use just publicly available videos, pouring through YouTube videos of either bystander or dash cam video of people doing a good job clearing an intersection, or maybe who didn't clear an intersection properly and it resulted in a collision. It's a good training tool, I think, just to illustrate the point that, these crashes do happen and you need to be cautious clearing intersections. One of the other challenges and the things I like to speak about when I'm training officers at our facility is that I try to remind them regularly that although we have a beautiful driving course that we can train on, it's not realistic. Um, there isn't the traffic out there. Usually we will put other cars out on our driving course to create other traffic at times in some exercises, but these are all people who know what's going on. So there isn't the traffic, there aren't pedestrians, there aren't people on bicycles, there aren't those things. So we try to talk about that, particularly related to clearing intersections. Even in a rural environment here in Oregon at the right time of the year, you'll have people out on riding bicycles and doing things. So those people aren't as visible. So it's a little unrealistic in a training environment always when we're training, just because of the safety issues concerned. So I try to remind our trainees, police recruits, that this is a great training environment, but you're getting good training, but it's you hit the real world, things are different. There's other traffic out there. There are people out there. You have to be even more cautious. So it really falls on, I think, the training officers once a new officer is out on the road to really instill good habits in intersection clearing, and making sure they are doing it consistently every time they're running, lights and siren through an intersection, to slow, be ready to stop, drive. Most states require you to drive with some sort of due regard or appropriate regard. There's different terminology in state law, but to get the officers really consistent in their habits clearing intersections, especially multi-lane intersections where you have multiple through lanes and turn lanes and and it's controlled by a light. Some agencies are, fortunate enough to have some of these optical control systems where a lot of fire departments use it, where they have a strobe on the front of their car and there's a transponder and it can change the light green in your direction at intersections. We even prior to my retirement in 2012, we had that system on our patrol cars, which was fantastic, but it also creates problems when the light cycles change quickly and drivers are confused. So you cannot completely rely on those systems either when clearing intersections. You still have to be cautious, slow, make sure everything's clear, make eye contact with the other driver, or have some sort of indication they actually saw you and they've stopped prior to proceeding. Another thing we talk about is in the training environment when we're talking about intersection clearing is we do an exercise leading up to our pursuit scenarios that we conduct. And it's a pretty simple kind of chase scenario where we can get recruits utilizing the radio, getting used to following the car, calling in directions, things they would be doing in a pursuit. But we use two cars for those scenarios, and that training piece, and we tell the officers that the second vehicle through the intersection, the second police vehicle, needs to really be cautious, although we have no side traffic during that exercise or other traffic. In the real world, oftentimes if a car is either engaged in a pursuit or navigating an intersection with lights and siren, the other people at the intersection will look and think, wow, look at the excitement that just passed by, and not really realize that there may be another police vehicle or emergency vehicle approaching. So we stress that during our training sessions too. If you're the second vehicle navigating an intersection, either running a code 3 run, a lights and siren run, or if you are in a pursuit, that you should be a little bit extra cautious in the intersection clearing. Related to siren use, that was another one of the areas I covered briefly in my latest article I wrote. Essentially, sirens have really limited effectiveness, and I don't know if emergency responders maybe getting into the job understand that. But anyone who's been on the job long enough, if you're driving a fire truck, an ambulance, a police car, you figure that out pretty quickly, that people just oftentimes don't hear you, even when your siren is engaged. This kind of relates back to intersections, but even just passing vehicles on a multi-lane roadway or other areas, I think it becomes pretty apparent quickly that officers' sirens aren't always effective. They're greatly impacted by speed, terrain, if they're in a city environment or rural environment. So there are issues that occur related to officers not having that understanding. Newer cars, well insulated. We have more distractions than ever these days in our cars, not just the radio on anymore. You've got navigation systems and entertainment systems and people looking at their phones and other things. So I think the officers need to understand that those sirens are not very effective. We in Oregon, for several years, since I started 10 years ago now, have been running a siren audibility drill exercise where we would pile recruits into a police car, one of our training vehicles, and then into, well, two police cars. But we would do basically high speed, a lower speed pass at about 40 miles an hour of a car while running the siren. And then we would do a higher speed pass on kind of our back long stretch of our training facility there, and we would have the recruits essentially in the car. We'd call it the soft car, your citizen car there, raise their hands up as soon as they heard the siren in the approaching car. And it was pretty eye-opening to all involved, especially on that higher speed pass at 55 and a car passing you at 75 or 80 miles an hour. The siren wasn't heard essentially until the passing car was kind of in the blind spot of the soft car, the other vehicle that we would have in the exercise. During kind of some COVID stuff, we stopped doing that exercise, but we videoed it with myself and another trainer, and we would present that. And I think I haven't been to that particular session, worked that particular session in a little bit, but last I understand they were still doing that. If you wanted to just save the time, it's a great way to still illustrate the point by just using some video footage with some audio and running that same exercise. We did the same exact thing, different speeds, and just had a little talk. And when I heard the siren, I would raise my hand in the car that was being passed and say, oh, I just heard that, there's where the car is. And you kind of see what happens. So it had a good impact as well. And I believe instead of running the physical exercise, that's what's still occurring down here up here in Oregon. There are some new, sirens and technological solutions. Some of you may use or have heard of the Rumbler, which is a lower tone siren. It's been developed it was developed in 2007. I've heard it out on the roads here in Oregon. It seems to be a little bit more effective. I don't think there's a lot of data. There was one study conducted by some acoustical engineers related to the Rumbler. It seemed to have some impacts on people's ability to hear oncoming sirens. But I don't have a lot of data related to that, but it is an option for people. When I've heard it, it does get my attention a little more. It just alternates the higher siren tones and the lower siren tones to gain people's attention. The lower tones, kind of like when the car's behind you at the intersection, bumping the loud stereo, you feel the vibrations a little more than anything. There's some future tech that's coming also that is just in-car. A lot of these in-car systems have pretty slick data systems, and they can communicate with other cars. There's always privacy concerns, I think, when that occurs. So some people are resistant to that, but I think at some point you may have some of the in-car navigation systems or other things may be able to notify drivers that there's an oncoming or an approaching emergency vehicle. That's great technology. I would love to see that in my lifetime be a standard thing in cars that would make officers responding to emergencies or engaged in pursuits safer. I think it's just really important to teach officers and demonstrate to them that the ineffectiveness of police sirens. I know as a new officer, the first few times someone didn't move out of my way, I thought they were just ignoring me. The more you work the job, you realize it's just related to them not hearing you most of the time. So I think it's just an important training point at some point to let drivers know that our new officers know that oftentimes, even with the use of the siren, you're not going to hear the drivers on the road may not hear you. So, um, so um, just really quick, I wanted to make another quick, two more quick comments related to things that Nick said. He mentioned tire deflation devices. I wrote an article that was published in PORAC in April of 2024. You can find me on LinkedIn. There's a link to that article there, but it's about tire deflation devices and some of the things we're doing in Oregon to train our officers here to maintain safety during deployment, cover concealment, having proper time to do so and a proper method to do so. That's another important aspect of what we do here. And also, just to really harp on it, I'm still stunned by the seatbelt statistics in the country related to officers not utilizing seatbelts. We see, I think, pretty good seatbelt use here in Oregon and on the West Coast. I'm not sure. Obviously, it's not as big of a problem maybe here as it is in other areas, but it still continues to be an issue. And I know there are officers in Oregon who aren't wearing their seatbelts. We do incorporate into our training. We do have a classroom session, and if people haven't seen this, you could go on YouTube and look up the LAPD Fifth and Wall incident. The LAPD produced an excellent video. It's about 18 minutes long, I believe. It's really impactful. Talks about the real impacts of officers that were involved in a collision at the intersection of Fifth and Wall in 1988 down in Los Angeles County, and it led to some big seatbelt changes there. And for anyone listening who thinks it's impeding their ability to do something tactically, I personally have never been able to find, it's mentioned in the video, and I haven't seen anything where a seatbelt has ever impeded an officer or led to their death or injury as a result of wearing it, not being able to get out of a car or whatever excuses officers are using still. But that's just my last two little bits, piggybacking on what I already talked about. But I hope we could, get more training incorporated into intersection clearing and understanding siren audibility in the law enforcement training environment. So if anyone has any questions or anything, feel free to let me know.
Hey, Kelly, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And those are some really important points. And I like the way you describe some of the training elements that you're putting together out there in Oregon. And, for me, back in 1987, we were on the RFK lot with sort of cone created intersections. And we did get a little bit of training, but again, it's something that, as you say, needs to be reinforced, consistently reinforced. And I appreciate you mentioning tire deflation devices. I'm going to go look up that article as well. If anybody wants to contact Kelly, just I'll put my email back up again if I can, and you can contact him through me, and I'll get you connected. We do have a couple of questions. One individual is asking if we have any information regarding how many police departments currently have a seatbelt policy in place. That's a great question. I know many do, and I know many do not. There are several, and to Kelly's point, a lot of them out west do have mandatory seatbelt policies. But not every agency has one. In fact, there's some agencies and some states that have written into law to still exempt public safety employees from wearing their seatbelt. I know in DC, trying to get my guys to wear their seatbelts, it was difficult because there was an exemption and a public safety exemption. And then at one point, there is even exemption for cab drivers after the hours of 7 p.m. here in DC, because again, that whole misconception about not being able to get out of the car and react or get out if you're being robbed, that kind of thing. And I think those are poorly designed laws and exemptions. But to answer your questions, I don't know. And I don't know who would have that data. I can anecdotally say we have lots of agencies who submit their traffic safety programs for the Destination Zero Award, and those submissions run the gamut across the nation. And one of the primary things they will talk about is a mandatory seatbelt policy. And of course, there are always going to be scofflaws. And that's why the other thing I harp on in law enforcement is first line supervision. The sergeants have to be on the street. They cannot be in the station handling a court no-show and handling some minor disciplinary issue, or, having to spend half their shift faxing their command roll call to somebody else and accounting for how many people are out on the street who have tasers and patrol rifles and all the things that sergeants have to do before they can ever think about hitting the street. Sergeants need to be on the street. They need to be monitoring the radio, and a recommendation is to have an official hot car for every district, precinct, or however you divide up your beats, that it's their job. They don't have to do anything that day except run in on calls and make sure things are being done right. The other question we had is, could implementing a designated sleeping space inside police stations improve officer safety? The answer is yes. And I know that Reno does this. I know that Las Vegas Metro Police does this. And I know that there are correctional facilities that do this. They have what's called a quiet room, where they allow officers to take a 30-minute nap on duty with the approval of an official. It's an excellent idea. And to the point of the person sending in the question, yeah, there's a great thing we need to avoid, and that is the public seeing an officer sleeping in a car. And we've all seen it happen on officers who are on a crime scene, right, where there's a major incident going on, and the next thing you know, you've got an officer behind the wheel of their car with the tape around the outside of their car that's blocking an intersection, and they're getting some Z's. So the public perception of that is very bad, but absolutely. And the restorative rest program, and you can go on Destination Zero on our website, find it. And the restorative rest program talks about agencies that have built spaces, not only for sleep, but just for officers to be able to decompress for a few minutes. A lot of these have very comfortable chairs. Some of them actually have beds you can sleep on. Others have, musics and lava lamps and low light and all that kind of stuff, just to kind of reduce stress. But absolutely, that's a great question. And yeah, there are agencies that are doing in that. Anna, anything else? We're good? Okay. Let me, I'm going to quickly, I want to thank you, Kelly, for your assistance and for your thoughts. And it was PORAC. You're right. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I go through so many publications. I couldn't remember which one it was. So I apologize to PORAC for that. But I want to thank you. And what I'll do is I'm going to see if I can pop my email back up here. Let's see if I'm going to be able to do that. No, it looks like I'm having trouble. But my, hang on a second. We're having technical difficulties here because I closed it out. Anyway, my email is nbreul@nleomf.org. So Nora, Bravo, Robert, Edward, Union, Lincoln, at Nora, Lincoln, Edward, Ocean, Mary, Frank.org. So pretty easy. So send me an email and I'll be happy to connect you with whatever you need. I want to thank everybody for your questions. I want to thank Rio and NHTSA and Anna for being my support here and handling questions. And again, I want to thank Kelly Couch for joining us today. Everybody be safe and buckle up.
Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.